the brain is built to transform. What we know now is that change isn't motivational, it's biological. Meditation and practices like it can increase cortical thickness in the brain. This is our actual gray matter. And we know that it reduces amygdala, both function and actual size, like your amygdala actually shrinks in the brain. So this is your stress, fight or flight. Our brains are always shifting based on our experience. But for most of us, it's shifting unconsciously. We're not creating the shift. That criticality is going to come right up on the edges of who it is that you think you are. But if you don't give yourself that space to disrupt that identity pattern, you're not opening yourself up to the opportunity for something new. Welcome to Soul Pod, where science meets mysticism and your inner wisdom leads the way. Hi, light beings. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to share with you a few updates. One, we have a retreat coming up in Joshua Tree, April 23rd to 27th. This is an opportunity with a small group of people to go through some really deep work, Kriya, extend your meditation. This is meditation for transformation, for meeting your future self now. We will rewire, we will expand, and we will try on new beliefs, new elevated states of being together. And we'll also do some contact events out in the desert as well. Joshua Tree, very potent. I hope you join us. So this episode, I wanted to get a little nerdy with you. So for those of you who don't know, my origin story is from biotech. So I studied biochemistry in school. I worked in toxicology research with a really world-renowned toxicologist. I got into cancer research and then genomic diagnostics, and was part of the team that brought one of the first, if not the first, commercial blood-based test for solid tumors to market. So I have a very nerdy side. So I want to take this episode to nerd out with you on the science of change and transformation. This is both what I've learned experientially and what the emerging research is showing us. So this will be your science update for the month. So we have to talk about neuroplasticity first. And this is the idea that the brain is built to transform. Neuroplasticity, the brain is built to transform. In the early 2000s even, we did not understand that the brain was built to transform. We thought that you're born with a certain number of neurons and that's it, you're done. And it's a process of withering, of atrophy as you age when it comes to the brain. What we know now is that change isn't motivational, it's biological. It very much has a biological foundation. And modern neuroscience shows that the brain is constantly rewiring itself through experience. And even last week, there's a study that came out that proves that we birth neurons, literal neuron cells. So there isn't this kind of you're born with it and then you're done reality when it comes to the brain. It's extremely self-organizing and it's extremely adaptable. And there's a lot of what I'm going to talk about here that can apply to our human capacity for transformation, change, and awakening, that the brain is wired for awakening, but also more practically in the context of avoiding dementia and a lot of cognitive issues that we see. I will say in all my years of studying with various people, I don't think I've ever seen an experienced meditator come down with dementia. Now that's anecdotal, but I'm just saying it's very interesting to me. So we know now that meditation and practices like it can increase cortical thickness in the brain. This is our actual gray matter. And we know that it reduces amygdala, both function and actual size. Like your amygdala actually shrinks in the brain. So this is your stress, fight or flight organ, or part of the brain rather. And this area starts to shift. Now, my experience when it comes to meditation and the amygdala is that you start to rewire for a new baseline. What do I mean by that? We all have kind of like a tripwire that happens between the parasympathetic system and the sympathetic system. The rest, digest, heal, transform side of the nervous system that we really need to be on in order to welcome transformation. Doesn't mean we'll stay there, but it does mean that's where we need to start. And there's this tripwire, this moment where the nervous system shifts into the sympathetic response, the stress response. And as you've heard from probably many people, that stress response can come from a meeting or a phone call that you're supposed to have that you have anxiety about. It can come from the smallest of things, and all of a sudden your heart's pounding, your eyesight's narrowing. And when we're in that state, it's a literal narrowing state. So I like to think of the parasympathetic response as an expanding state. So you're moving up the funnel of awareness. And if you're watching the video, you're going to see me making the funnel here, and you're expanding up so you can perceive more. This is where answers to your questions happen. This is where the sudden downloads, the connecting the dots happens. But you have to be expanded. And so this is the parasympathetic. This is the body being ready to expand beyond itself. It has to have that safety. Now, when you're in a stress response, there's a narrowing. You see less options. You see less possibilities, quite literally, because you're bringing all of your awareness literally down the funnel into this space and time. Because the body's like, I need to protect you. And the mind is like, wait, what? What do I need protecting from? And so there's a relationship here, and you can't blame the body necessarily or your mind. But if you're aware of that, you can start to move up and down the funnel, because there are moments, right, when we really do want to narrow our awareness down into this space and time. But you can start to do that consciously. And so that tripwire between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic response, you can start to move that up. I think that's what happens, at least in my experience and from what we're seeing in the data, that's what's happening with long-term meditation. So transformation then is these repeated states. So let's just take the meditative state. Repeated states, which results in rewired circuitry. Repeated states, rewired circuitry. And then there's a new identity. There's a new experience. Let's bring this down into your day-to-day. So if you try meditation once, maybe a couple times a month, I get it. I've been there. But the repeated state element of that equation is not coming into play. So the rewiring, at least in the direction that you want to rewire, remember, our brains are always shifting based on our experience. But for most of us, it's shifting unconsciously. We're not creating the shift. And for most of us, those roads in the brain that we've been running, we continue to run the same roads, the same patterns. We have 70,000 to 90,000 thoughts a day. Over 90% of those thoughts are repetitive thoughts. And about 95 of those are negative, 95%. So vast majority of our thoughts are repetitive. Vast majority of our thoughts are negative. That's the everyday person. You can start to have some compassion, right? For what others must be going through, given that fact. And so part of awakening, bringing this back to awakening, is to decide and intend for yourself, not just to reduce stress, which it does, we see that in the amygdala, but to transform, to evolve. And I think this transformation goes far beyond rewiring for calm. I think it goes into other dimensions of experience. And so you have the power, quite literally, of the most magnificent inner technology that we know of. It is unparalleled. And you can start to tune it for the identity, for the experience that you want to have, to fully realize your soul in this dimension of space and time. So the state repetition part is important. And one of the best ways, and I chuckle here is because I didn't plan on this, but it just flows perfectly, is one of the amazing things about state repetition and kicking that off is an immersive experience. So whether you come to the Soul Pod retreat or some other retreat, those are opportunities to initiate this new state, to be able to touch it, to feel it, to experience it, and be like, yes, I want more of that. I have some clarity that I didn't have before because I wasn't giving myself the space to experience something new, right? Where most of us are getting up, washing our face, getting a glass of water. We do the same thing every single day. Now, you can do the same thing every single day and be incredibly present with it. We can live two vastly different, identical days. But there is something powerful about getting out of that, mixing it up so that the brain's a little bit more pliable and starting to experience that state change, bring it back into your everyday. And that's where the change, the transformation really starts to happen. That's when the repeated states, the rewired circuits, and the new experience start to emerge. And that's why, quite frankly, we designed the Soul Pod journeys over 21 rituals, because I found that if you do something, as long as you can, obviously is ideal, but if you do something for 3 days and then 7 days and then 21 days, those are milestone moments from my experience of having meditated every day for over a decade. Those tend to be touchstone moments. And then you get to 2 months and then 3 months, and your life is really changing. It really is changing. Those circuits are starting to find a groove in your mind. So this brings me to another point that I really have been giving a lot of thought lately. And I experience this myself. So sometimes we can really love to intellectualize something. Meditation, philosophy, stoicism, science. But we're not bringing it into our experience. So it's staying mental, it's staying philosophical, it's staying contemplative. I think this can be a bit of a trap because it feels good to know all these things, to know the text, to know the science, to know the philosophy, the books, the papers. I love it, don't get me wrong. But if you don't bring that down into your experience, you're not optimizing for the second part of that equation, which is the repeated states, the experience of the experience, the new identity, the new possibility. You're not really bringing that in. You have a lot of knowledge, but maybe not a lot of wisdom. And so I remind myself of this a lot of times because I love reading. I love the intellectual. But ultimately, the most powerful information that you're going to receive is through your own perception, your own experience. Because once you experience that, it's known to you, right? That's wisdom when truth becomes knowing. So, just a little reminder there that we can have fun, hang out in the mind, in the philosophical, in the academic, in the philosophy. But let's rewire our minds. Let's step into our interdimensionality. Let's shift into who it is that we came here to be in this lifetime. This is an opportunity, a massive opportunity this life, to experience as much of it as you can, to experience as much of yourself as you can, to heed the call. Another thing I hear from people is, well, meditation just takes so long to get into it. And there's some truth to that. That's why we do journeys in SoulPod. But we also know from a 2025 UC San Diego study that in 1 week of meditation practice, which we're also going to be doing in Joshua Tree, there are measurable changes in brain activity. There is a change in blood biology, including markers linked to neuroplasticity, immune function, and stress resilience, right? So we're talking a week. We're talking 5 to 7 days here. So, and from what I've heard from people in SoulPod who have come to our retreats or gone to other retreats, you can see the change in people. That's why I really like to do before and after photos, because you can quite literally see the shift in people's faces. Immersion will accelerate this change, certainly, absolutely. And something like a retreat experience, and this is why I think they're seeing such profound shifts in biochemistry and neurology, is because of that immersion. And then long term, you actually bringing that into your day to day. I mean, there's not a way to not change your life. Like, you will change your life. It's the hero's journey, though. It requires some effort. It requires some dedication. This is why devotion is talked about so much in so many spiritual traditions. So there's another way to think about transformation. And this is a bit more philosophical, but I really like it. And it's a staged process of consciousness evolution. And I'll give you 2 models for it. The first one is yogic. So in some of the yogic teachings, and my teacher shared this with us, there are stages of human consciousness. So you can think of this both as an individual experience throughout your life, even throughout your day. You're moving through different gradients of what I'm about to talk about. And then you can think of it collectively as well. So the first stage of this consciousness is the embryonic consciousness. So embryonic consciousness is, you can think of it as like a new human, a new incarnation. There's a naivety to this experience. It's all an experience, and you and I have had all of them. And so it's a very impressionable consciousness. There's not a ton of baggage, and they're just open. They're just open. And then we have a fetal consciousness. So you'll notice this is all very birth related. Fetal consciousness. This is when the consciousness is, we'll call it absorptive, right? So it is taking in a lot of resources. And if we want to get practical here, it can be, and it can manifest in ways where the ego reigns. And so there's consumption reigns, hierarchy reigns. We can see that playing out on the planet. And the irony is, in this teaching, is that a lot of times it's the fetal consciousness leading. Because of the unawareness, there's less fear. There's more fear of not being perceived. And so they tend to seek to lead, to influence, to be in power. And we can find this, again, this comes down into the everyday experience as well. And then we have the natal consciousness. So the natal consciousness, I want you to think of it as moving through the birth canal. So it's moving through the birth canal. Everything gets really tight, constricted. This is also like the cocoon moment for the butterfly, where everything is dissolving and you're quite literally going through the process of being birthed into a new dimension. Now, in this context, the dimension that I'm talking about is awareness. You awaken. You have that moment that all of a sudden everything's changed. You saw reality, you saw through the illusion in some way. There is no going back. This is the natal consciousness moment. And it's difficult and it's trying and it's hard. But you've just experienced something. This is the initiation. And then we emerge on the other side of the natal experience, the Dahyanal experience. And so this is when you've had that initial awakening, you've seen through the illusion, and curiosity is driving you. You're like, wait a second, everything is not as I thought. How do I make sense of this new perception, of this new world that I've entered? This is the seeker's moment. This is where you're reading all the books. You're seeking out the teachers. You're looking for the answers. There's a vulnerability in this moment. And this is where spiritual traditions and teachers have to be very, very caring. So much care is needed in all of these stages, but especially the emergent stage, because there is that inherent vulnerability in that experience. And then we emerge into the bhavishal level of consciousness. And there's some other ones we could get into. But this is the self-realized consciousness. I like the term soul realized. And the numbers, if you want to think about it as far as population and the spread across humanity now, there's only a few of us that are in that bhavishal stage, the Dahyanal stage. And this does not mean that anybody's better than anybody else. It just means you're perceiving, experiencing different things, right? And the thing about these elevated states of consciousness, as you get further and further and further into them, it's greatly impacting the whole, much more so than a larger amount of the embryonic, fetal, natal consciousness. I hope that makes sense. It's just a way to kind of wrap your head around the process of evolution when it comes to consciousness. And there's a lot more to talk about when it comes to that. So this is a newer concept for me, and it's called criticality. And this is a hypothesis of consciousness, which is that the optimal brain functioning exists at the edge of order and chaos. Optimal brain functioning exists at the border of order and chaos. So what does this mean? It means that, kind of like what we were talking about, that if there is so much order in your life, so much predictability, so much of the known, that is not necessarily where change is going to happen. That's not necessarily where transformation is going to happen. That's why I view meditation as my moment of introducing more chaos into my experience, because the void, when you move beyond the mind, it is chaotic. It is unknown. There is we could also speak about a natural order there, but it's pure possibility. So I like this idea that this transformation happens on the edges. And I know this can be a crunchy idea for many of us because we don't naturally tend to move towards our edges. We like to stay away from them. We like to feel safe. But there's a way to walk yourself into transformation. And that's why daily practice, again, I'm going to harp on it, but it's so important for this next phase of our evolution to move us through these states. That's why this is so important, because you can walk yourself into that edge right past where you've gone before when it comes to your mind, that relationship between the mind and the higher mind. Let's talk about this walking ourselves into this criticality. And I'll give you another version of the consciousness evolution idea. So, similar to what we just outlined with the embryonic, fetal, natal process, but we can put it into more practical words maybe for you. So, the seeker is the first stage. This is where you just have a curiosity. You're like, I feel like there's something out there for me. I feel like I heard meditation's good for me. I kind of want to have a transcendent moment. I'd like to go beyond my body because how do I relate to who it is that I am if I can? And so there's this deep curiosity that starts to bubble up within, especially during certain times of life. So that's the seeker stage. Then the initiate stage. This is when you have an initial experience. That is your initiation, where you peer behind the veil for a moment. And all it takes is a moment and you're changed, right? This is similar to the yogic perspective. So seeker, initiate, you start to acquire a lot of knowledge because that curiosity just gets fed more and more and more. And so you become the philosopher, right? You know a lot. You know a lot. And maybe this goes together at the same time, but then you start to bring that information, the knowledge that you've sought, into your experience. It becomes experiential. And you start to be a practitioner, a teacher, even. You start to bring it down into the embodied state. You start to access your own wisdom. And all the while, your brain is shifting. New neural pathways are being made, and this accelerates as you do more repetitive new practices to consciously shift you into the mystic, into the interdimensional being, into the magician, the witch, all these avatars of spiritual excellence that we can point to. That's the direction that you can go. So it's just another way to kind of think about this. So this is a little bit more anecdotal for you, but I think it's starting to have some foundations in science. And this is the idea that identity is a neural pattern and that it can collapse. So, what am I talking about here? Transformation is constantly showing us that it challenges identity. It's going to come right up, that criticality, it's going to come right up on the edges of who it is that you think you are. But this identity network is stable in the brain. It's like an actual network in the brain that forms your identity, your self-referential thought. And we know that the DMN, default mode network in the brain, is very stimulated in beginner meditators. So it's kind of all over the place. This is your rumination. This is any thoughts in reference to self. I am this, I am that. Can't believe I did this. Can't believe I didn't do that. This is the self-referential thought. We know that in long-term meditators, that self-referential thought, the DMN network, is greatly reduced. So to me, this is my theory, and I think we're going to see some support for it. I think that as you start to expand beyond the neural circuitry of your identity, that it starts to collapse. And who it is that you are, your identity, and how attached you are to it starts to really loosen. Because how could it not? When you go into these states of transcendence, of being more wave than particle, of being in the field, where the brain is entangling, there is the neuron component, but there's also this field component. I think we'll find that we have both. Then this attachment to your body, this space and time, it all starts to disentangle. It all starts to get looser. And so it makes sense to me that one of the things that we see in this type of deep work is a shift in identity, in how it is that you think about yourself. And you start to open up possibility of like, oh, I could be this. I could be that. I could do that. I don't have to do this anymore. I'm not super attached to this role. I can let it go. I see it over and over again. But if you don't give yourself that space to disrupt that identity pattern, you're not opening yourself up to the opportunity for something new. So, opening yourself up for something new by shifting your neurology is just one of the coolest things I think that we can spend our time on. So, here I'll plant another seed for you. Transformation isn't random, it's a predictable stage of evolving consciousness. There is, like we've talked about, there is an equation to this. There are stages of it that are repeatable. So that's why I call it the science of transformation, because you can see the stages evolve. The yogis saw this. You can see the stages happening within each individual and as a collective. Right? So we've got a good chunk of the collective that's in some fetal consciousness, and we have an increasing amount that are in the natal. They're in the cocoon. They're emerging out the other side. So, this transformation, another thing that's uncomfortable to think about but important, is that it requires friction. Again, this goes back to the criticality idea. There's a certain amount of friction that creates the energy, the heat, for transformation to unfold. And this brings me to another concept about meditation being challenging and maybe causing anxiety even. So I have some gripes with some of those studies. I used to work in clinical research myself, so I like that area and I'm glad that we're studying it. But if you're not taught and the stage isn't set about what meditation is actually going to be doing for you, what the reality is of starting out on that journey, then a lot of what people first experience and they're not prepared for it makes sense to me. It can look like anxiety increases, but it's not meditation that's increasing it. It's your awareness of the already standing anxiety that you have. Meditation is just bringing your awareness to it. It's not necessarily making it worse, it's making it more apparent. And that's one of the first things about difficult experiences and meditations that we learn to move through is that awareness at the very beginning, especially, but always, is the goal, not necessarily comfort, because meditation is not, it's just not comfortable a lot of the times. I've been meditating for a long time now, and I still have days where it is one of the hardest things that I'll do that day. But that's why this repeated pattern, this repeated choice of rewiring through ongoing attempts at transformation It gives me, I like to think of it as a shot on goal each day. And if I have a rough day, that's okay because there's tomorrow. And I know I'm pretty close to a breakthrough whenever I have a rough meditation. So again, it's anxiety when it comes to meditation or emotional awareness. That's the other thing that happens when you're sitting with yourself. Most of us avoid sitting with ourselves for that exact reason. So we don't really want to know how we feel. We don't want to face it. And I can understand that, right? Because we're not given a ton of tools in this day and time to manage our emotions. So I don't blame anyone for that. It's not set up right now to give us the power of emotional mastery. But that is what's happening, especially around the natal moving into the practitioner emergent state of consciousness. One of the first things that you'll learn is that emotional mastery is so important because we create through how we think and what we feel. There's a loop there, thinking and feeling, thinking of the mind, feeling of the body. And a lot of times that loop is driving your experience in the direction that is not necessarily creative, which is from the body to the mind. And we start to rewire it so that the mind is directing the body. You're consciously creating how it is you want to feel in the now. That's manifestation. I'm not saying it's easy either. It is simple. It sounds simple and it is powerful and it will change your life. But actually moving through and embodying the mechanics of that is massive. So, when you meet resistance in meditation, we'll maybe do another episode just on this. Don't be surprised if those emotions come up. That's why I'm very open to people expressing their emotions in meditation. Let the tears flow. Do what you need to do. Unless you're disturbing anybody else, then maybe we'll find another way. But I think that there is an expected stoicism when it comes to meditation, which I also understand because I started off with Zen style practices. But I think it's important that we move, that we allow the emotion to go all the places that it needs to go. So the next time that you feel like your anxiety is getting worse in meditation, I encourage you to remember that it's not your anxiety getting worse. It's the awareness of your anxiety increasing. And that awareness is really powerful because once you become aware of something, you can start to choose. Otherwise, it's deciding for you. There's a lot more that we can go into on that, but I think it's a good place to leave it for today. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it gives you a few scientific foundations to think about when it comes to your practice, your evolution, the evolution of our species, what's possible, and why this equation of transformation is so important. And that if you really truly bring it into your life, you can create something that you feel extremely fulfilled about. So till next time, light being, have a beautiful, beautiful day.